Being joined by a very important guest at this point. We are being joined by Jessica Dean, one of the attorneys who represented Theresa Garcia's family in their lawsuit. Thank you very much, Jessica, for joining us for this case. Tell us what unfolded in the court. Tell us a little bit about this family.
So this was a case where she was diagnosed in January of 2020, and we got ready for trial. And weeks before the trial was to start, J&J started their first bankruptcy. As you know, they went through the bankruptcy process successfully until it was appealed to the Third Circuit, which found that they acted in bad faith. They then brazenly, 2 hours and about 15 minutes later, filed a second one, causing months more delay. We finally got our chance back to go back to court. Theresa Garcia died at 53 with 6 children of malignant mesothelioma, a cancer uniquely associated with asbestos. This was the first case our firm was able to take to verdict after these 2 fraudulent bankruptcies. We had a 5-week trial where Johnson & Johnson had an extraordinary amount of effort. I'm talking about a half a dozen law firms and over a dozen people fighting our small firm, and ultimately are still seeking to pay off the ovarian people, which is what you referenced earlier with the over $6 billion settlement offer. That is not my world. I only know things kind of from hearing about it from others, but believe that doesn't even cover medical expenses for legitimate claimants, and that they're even willing to consider nominal payments where there isn't necessarily a legitimate claim, just to get the right people to vote for this plan to keep people from getting into the courtroom. And ultimately, for the people that do what I do for a living, they are refusing to engage in settlement unless you're willing to settle your entire docket, not just currently, but 10 years going forward, and then won't help anyone else in this fight. And so what Johnson & Johnson is trying to do in the United States, where there is a sophisticated consequence legal system, is silence the people that understand what they've done. I think we can prove that they were the leader in holding back an entire industry from selling something they knew was a carcinogen, because they got this unique benefit of being considered a baby company, even though they are a mega pharma company. And so they had an incentive that people like Avon or Mary Kay or Estee Lauder didn't have, and led this fight. And they will go to nothing to continue to protect their image and pretend like they didn't do what they did.
Jessica, would you help us to understand, in the court, while this case was being fought, how did you establish the connect between the Johnson & Johnson baby powder and asbestos and cancer? How was this proved before the court?
Theresa Garcia reached out to another firm that's local. We're a Texas-based firm. She was born and raised in Chicago. But we had done a few other talc cases, and so we joined in with them kind of during COVID. It was one of our first cases where we didn't get to meet her in person because it wasn't safe. And so we did her deposition. She wasn't able to complete it because she was so sick, but we were able to piece together her history from her mother, who testified, from her children, and from her brothers and sisters. She's one of 8. To show from the day that she was born, literally leaving the hospital, to a few years before she was diagnosed, she used this baby powder on herself, on her children, on her nieces and nephews, on her grandchildren regularly. She was a heavy user. Johnson & Johnson targeted particular populations, and the Hispanic population was a huge source of not only use of baby powder, Johnson's baby powder, but they were considered heavy users. And we've been able to find pictures of her little girls with powder literally from the neck down, kind of playing as children, and pictures of the powder in their home. So we not only had witnesses saying this is something she used her entire life, but we actually have photographs to see what the use looked like and to show that it was connected to baby powder. And then Johnson & Johnson does an incredibly lengthy investigation to see if there's anything else they can blame it on, because asbestos is in a lot of contexts. So they looked at abatement records in her school. They looked at every plant that was in a 5-mile radius that she lived in. They looked at what every person she lived with did for a living to try to find something, a scapegoat. And the nature of this disease is even if there were other exposures, they all accumulate to cause harm in our bodies, but they couldn't even find anything else to blame. And so they just claimed that this was a spontaneous cancer, which can happen in many cancers. But at the heart of why I'm so passionate about this is they have used the lack of connection to asbestos in women in cases for decades to say that women just have this cancer spontaneously, stunningly more often than men, without an explanation biologically for why that would be so. And the reality is we're not somehow weaker in this regard. It's just we had a exposure route that was ignored, and not just because of ignorance. It was because a lot of companies, that's not accurate. A few companies led by Johnson & Johnson understood the problem and kept it from the public. And I really think part of the reason jurors are so incensed in these cases in a way that they're not in other asbestos cases I've done.
Right. Jessica, would you take us through what did the court say? What did the court say while giving out the judgment? What were the observations? How did the court conclude on this?
So the court affirmed the jury verdict, which found not only for damages for the family that were relatively significant, but one of the huge findings that we had was also that this reorganization of companies with LLT turning, which used to be LTL, moving to a company called Johnson & Johnson Holdco to a company called Kenvue, was done in a manner which violated the laws of the states of Illinois. In essence, they were trying to evade liability and restructure things in a way that you just can't, even though that was their intent. So another huge victory here was even if they try a third bankruptcy, even if they continue to try to buy off these claims in different ways that keep us from our juries, I think that finding that says Kenvue is also responsible for 70% of the harm is wildly important.
Right. Jessica, thank you very much for joining us, for taking out the time. You've been in a thick of a whole lot of things that you need to handle, but thank you for joining us in such a short notice. Our prayers with the family as well.